There are only 2 episodes left of Succession ever. So we thought this would be a good time to talk about the season so far. I mean, overall thoughts on the show. We've never talked about this show on live stream or even really with each other that much.
Yeah.
So this is going to be interesting. So we'll talk about the series overall. We'll talk about the season so far and these last 2 episodes that are coming up. How is this all going to wrap up? So I guess first off, let's just talk about the season so far, some of the highlights. First, just headline. How have you been feeling about the season so far? What are you liking? What are you not liking?
So I'm a lot more invested in the show the last few episodes. I felt like everything leading up to, spoiler alert, just make sure, spoilers for Succession. Everything, like the episodes leading up to Logan's death, I felt like I just didn't feel that invested. And then I was like, okay, when he died, like the next episode, I was like very intrigued just to see sort of how things went. And then I felt like there was another kind of like lull where I just like wasn't that interested. And now these last few episodes, I feel really invested in it again. And I was wondering why that is. And I just felt like there's something about the plot that I've just not been that bought in on. And I think part of it is just that like Kendall and Roman just feel so stupid to me. Like this whole thing of trying to prevent the deal with Madsen, just like, it just, I don't know, it just felt dumb to me. But now in the last couple episodes, the stakes have just generally built. Like the fact that they're toying with an election just to prevent this deal going through, it still feels stupid to me in certain ways. But now it's like, okay, now this feels exciting and important and impactful, right? Like these two like stupid brothers and these stupid things they're trying to achieve have massive consequences. And so now I feel, I don't know, I feel very invested in it again. And some of the emotional conflict of like Shiv and Tom has like really come to a climax. And so I don't know, I feel very bought in again, but that's sort of, my investment has just sort of waxed and waned as the seasons progressed.
It's a challenging show, and everyone always gives the caveat before they talk about Succession. So I've been watching the show for a while, but I wasn't watching it like I watched Better Call Saul, where I also listened to a bunch of podcasts about it, did a podcast about it, read about it. So now I'm kind of catching up on all the discourse. And one thing I see is that anytime someone writes about Succession, they're like, let me caveat up front, if I met any of these characters in real life, I would hate them. These are horrible characters. But part of the magic of the show is they get you to empathize with them. But I do think there's something to that. One of the challenges is that I think part of the point of this show is that the characters really don't change at their core in terms of their values, in terms of their morals and the choices they make. Part of the point it's making, I think, is that their wealth and their power kind of insulates them from consequences. I think Kendall is one of the key examples of that, because when someone is an addict, what is one of the things that can get them to kind of wake up and start making improvements? Hitting rock bottom. His rock bottom should have been, I accidentally killed a guy. And he does sort of hit a rock bottom. He suffers some consequences, but ultimately he essentially gets away scot-free. That wouldn't happen for a quote unquote normie, a non-billionaire. So he doesn't suffer those consequences, and he's able to relapse, and he's able to basically go on and not change in any meaningful way. So one side effect of that is that between episodes, I don't find myself mulling over the show as much as I do with some other shows. Like with Better Call Saul, between episodes, I would be really worried for Jimmy McGill. What choices is he going to make? Versus this show, I wonder about their choices, but I don't worry about them as much because I'm not worried about their souls.
Yeah.
I'm sort of like, they're already tainted. They are bad people, and I don't think they're going to change. So there's not, the stakes aren't there as much.
Yeah.
But when I actually watch the show, they put me in the character's shoes, and they get into some really intense situations, and I feel what they're feeling. When Kendall is about to go on and give his living plus, which is one of my favorite episodes this season, the way that they kept making the joke about how am I supposed to follow that? He just promised eternal life. When he's about to go on stage and Carl is like, let me see those numbers. I'm nervous for Carl because he's got like 30 seconds as the CFO to be like, what numbers are you about to present? And then I'm nervous for Kendall because the CFO is barking in his ear when he's about to go on stage. And I feel it. So the show pulls me in. And then when I leave the episode, I kind of just walk away. You know?
I I think there's something to, you're right, like it's just so entertaining in the moment. But yeah, because like the characters' souls don't feel like they're at stake. You're less bought into it in between episodes. But like the characters are so entertaining. Like even Carl, I love Carl,
He's so
right?
good.
Because he gives this what's the term? He's like, he seems like this like nice uncle,
Yeah.
right? But he's not, right? Like I love the way he threatens Kendall as he's getting like to go on stage. Like it's like a pretty savage threat that's very warranted, but he says it in his like sort of friendly, avuncular way.
Well, and first he starts gently because that's
Yeah.
his usual tactic. Like when it's someone needs to do something he doesn't want to do it, he's like, "You might be better suited for that after all." And so on the walk to the stage, he keeps telling him like, "Let me just see the numbers. I hear you've made some tweaks to them." And that's a good point that you're bringing up and that Dee brought up. This season has some really good comedy
Yeah.
so far. That's the other big caveat you always see in discourse around this show. And I wasn't really into this show. I hated all the characters until I realized it's a comedy, which always feels reductive to me because watch episode 3 of this season with a harrowing 27 minutes of these children realizing they lost their father.
Yeah.
It's a barrel of laughs. But the show definitely uses comedy a lot.
Yeah.
Anytime there's an opportunity for it, they lean into comedy, which I think is another part of why sometimes I don't feel myself as caught up with the show between episodes. Because comedies usually don't leave you with lingering discussion, discourse, and thoughts. You go for some laughs and you walk away. But I definitely think the show is not just comedy. The way that Jesse Armstrong, the showrunner, put it, he said the show encompasses comedy. And I think part of that is because comedy is real. It's part of these characters' lives.
Yeah, and I think it sort of psychologically makes sense too, right? Is that these characters, they sort of like pretend like they don't take anything seriously a lot of the time. Guess who my favorite character is in this season?
Greg.
No.
Oh,
One more guess.
Roman?
Yes. I love Roman this season. I think we've really seen like a Roman glow up these last few episodes. But you're right, like characters don't change, right? Like Roman's core has not changed at all, but we're just seeing him do so much more. And I mean, the way the last episode ended, I thought was so cool that Roman just like really took charge, right? And he basically like helped put what's his name? What's the president? Or
hold on. I
the
keep forgetting
president
it.
elect.
So I wrote it down. Not Matson. The bad guy.
Yeah. Anyway, like he basically puts that guy into the White House, or potentially, right? And
Mencken.
He basically helps Mencken get into the White House. He's like buddy with this guy, and like it was just so cool seeing like Roman in this seat of power now. And like his whole attitude is just so funny. It's this sort of nonchalant, F everybody else.
Yeah.
I'm just going to do this. Like he's threatening Connor for like 2 days straight, trying to get him to drop out of the race. Like he's just so nonchalant in the way that he's just trying to like push everything. And you know what it's coming from. And they show it to us at the end of not this last episode, but the one before it. It's all coming from he just wants to be like his dad so he could feel like he gets his dad's approval.
Yeah, I think there's like 2 layers to the themes of this show. There's the almost personal moral philosophy of it, where it shows the consequences of these characters' actions to themselves. Like you look at Logan, and he ended up dying on an airplane, not surrounded by loved ones, but by people who all are there for transactional reasons. They have something to get out of him. It's a business relationship. That's one level. Then there's the other level, which is the more, I would say, satirical, saying things about society overall. And I think these characters, like if you took Roman, he's not in other circumstances, if he were the same person, you wouldn't say he's the worst person in the world. But everything he does is amplified by the fact that he's in an unearned position of power and wealth. So he can make very emotional decisions where he's trying to earn his dead father's approval. So he's going to put somebody in power, or like very significantly shift the results of an election potentially. Kendall, he was on the fence. He wasn't sure what to do. Once he felt personally betrayed by Shiv, that's what makes the decision. So we don't normally look at a character making an emotional, rash decision and say they're a horrible person. But because of the circumstances he's in, because he's in that position of power, his tantrums have consequences for the entire nation, possibly the entire world.
Yeah, and that's a story we just keep seeing unfolding over and over in succession, right? With Roman, we've seen almost the exact same thing before with that rocket launch, where like he just like all these like engineers and like I guess astronauts, or maybe it was just like the technicians on the rocket just like die because he like
Nobody died.
Really?
One person lost a thumb, I think, or a finger.
oh, I thought like 10 people died.
No, no, that was one of my favorite moments. That's like when I fell in love with the show because I was into it for the first season, and then when he sees the rocket blow up on his phone, he just makes this perfect face, puts the phone away, and just gets back to the party. But he just looks like white as a ghost. And then eventually, when he learns that no one actually died, he's like, "Someone lost a finger. Oh, that's not that big a deal." And you could just see the relief. It would have been hard for me to love. I love the Roman character. He's just so fun. It would have been hard for me to have fun with that character if he was responsible for actual deaths.
Yeah.
I think some other things are going on too with him pushing for Mencken. Part of it is he's the one who kind of initially created the relationship with Mencken. And so he knows if they put him in the White House, then it's going to create a very powerful connection that he's in charge of. It will make him a lot like Logan.
He's sitting on the throne now.
Right.
And I think that's how it ended.
I think so. And I think that's a lot of why he's fighting for that power. Because like you said, it's going to make him like his father. It's going to give him that power. There is also a sort of a nihilistic lashing out, which I think he's always had a bit of that. And now it's amplified because he's pissed about losing his father. He's trying to like process this. I think these characters don't have a lot of emotional tools in their disposal. So he's going to process grief in a very unique way. And I think part of it is lashing out in a nothing matters, screw everyone else kind of a way.
Yeah.
Jesse Armstrong, again, the showrunner, he also brought up an angle, which is that Rome may be looking for a father figure. And he may look at Mencken as kind of his next father figure. And so getting a pat on the head from him of like, thank you, you're doing the right thing for me. That might also be playing into it.
I think so. And I think in a way, he's also just trying to be like his dad, to feel like he has his dad there, right? Because he kept saying like, well, this is what dad would have done.
Same when he was firing people.
Yeah.
Which again is another thing I loved in one of my highlights of the season.
And even then, just the fact that he's choosing the same political party that his dad would have.
Yeah, even though it's not for any ideological reasons, right? It's just, I think if Jimenez, I think is the opponent, if their campaign were more willing to say, we'll kill the deal, he might have gone with them, potentially. I think the line that kind of sums up that theme is when they start arguing over, every time Kendall, when you wanted chicken as a kid, you always had chicken. He's like, so because we had so much chicken when you were a kid, we have to elect a fascist. And it kind of takes that idea of like childhood trauma and just these emotional decision making, these broken people. Normally, we wouldn't hate them. We might sympathize with them more. But in the context they're in, when they have a temper tantrum, it can shift politics.
Yeah.
And now they keep making the point, if you listen to the behind the scenes interviews, to be clear, Mencken is not definitely elected. ATN has called the election for him, but there's still the Electoral College. There's still a legal process that has to happen, and it might not go that way.
Yeah.
Either way, they've still created a big wedge in politics.
Yeah, and just by creating this popular narrative that he is the president-elect, it can sway whatever cases might come, whatever, processes, all these things that are going to happen, right? You could imagine if they hadn't called it and then the Electoral College, they sort of flipped the vote because they're like, well, this is how they would have voted, right? That could have gone better if the narrative wasn't against them. But now there's like a narrative in support of Mencken, and so it's going to make it a lot harder to overturn it.
Exactly. Before we go on from this topic of a Roman firing people, I wanted to come back to that for a second. Firing Joy, totally justified.
So, okay, have we seen Joy before?
I think we have. This was one of those things I kind of missed on my first watching of the season because so they made this movie Calypsotron, like the hibernation or something.
Yeah.
And someone brought it up in the chat here.
And it was a disaster, right?
Yeah, DD, showing the Gojo people basically an unfinished MCU movie in the morning to tank the deal was hilarious.
That was so funny.
Yeah. But that's exactly what we were talking about earlier on the stream, where it's these movies get written, they're terrible, and then somehow they get made with this huge budget, and you watch it and you're like, I would have known that was awful.
Yeah.
And so I was honestly kind of satisfied seeing Roman finally go up to one of these people and say, you know what? No, you're fired.
But
That's a very David Zaslav move.
I was a little confused because, like, he and Joy though were talking about, like, Joy was bringing up her concern about the rightward lean of ATN. So was she just concerned about how that might influence like their film reception?
That was my impression.
Okay.
It was a branding thing of like people are not, they don't like our brand and it might affect our movies. That was my impression. of what he
Okay.
was saying.
And then Roman was saying, let's churn out the hits. Basically, like, we're going to give you a bunch more money. Go make us a bunch of hit movies.
Yeah, and clearly she
Okay.
wasn't receptive to it. She was just
Yeah.
like, yeah, whatever, like not taking him seriously at all. And then he fired Jerry for the same reason. She wasn't showing him the respect that would have shown Logan. Now, having said all that, I do think Joy for Calypsotron maybe should have been fired, but not in that way. You know, you walk away and you go through the proper process.
Oh, that's what he started the conversation by saying. He was saying who's getting fired over. Was it Calypsotron? He
Yeah,
said,
that's exactly right. Yeah, who's
Oh.
who's going to get fired for that just horrible movie?
yeah. And so he was kind of pissed off too because she was like, let's sidebar that. And he was kind of like, go F yourself.
Go F yourself. Another highlight of the season. I mean, we talked about Logan's death. I just wanted to talk about how amazing that episode
Yeah.
was. They made it feel really real. The fact that we didn't get a death scene, we didn't get last words, it felt as sudden as it does in real life. And you even see the difficulty in communicating exactly what's happening. Like I loved, one thing I think this show does really well is it doesn't shy away from these really vulnerable moments where in another show the characters find out their father died. You're with them for a few minutes, okay, cut, next scene. And we sort of miss some of that grieving period. Here we are just with them for almost half an hour. And like Tom has to call and deliver this news. It's like, what is he going to say? And I thought they handled all that perfectly, where he just starts with, you know, your father is very, very sick. He's not really sure how to say, like, I think he's dying.
Yeah.
And there's so much back and forth over, is he dead? He might not be dead. Roman goes into denial. You know, stop saying he's dead. That's a very mean thing to say. Stop. Just great to watch.
I loved, each character's reaction. I loved how Kendall starts trying to like business everything, right? He wants to like take care of stuff. He's like, all right, put on the pilot. Like now I got to talk to the pilot.
Yeah.
And I forget who is Logan's like sort of second in command guy, Frank. Yeah. And Kendall's talking to Frank, and Frank is just like, Kendall, I can't do that. He's like, why can't you put me on the phone with the pilot? And Frank has to be like, they're flying the plane, Kendall.
He calls
Like,
him son.
son, yeah. And like that was, there are these tender emotional moments in the show, and I mean that episode was full of it. And you're right, they really slowed it down. I mean, it was an hour of watching them coming to the realization that their dad's dying.
Yeah, apparently they did a take of that entire sequence of events in one take. They shot 27 minutes straight, like a one-act play. And the funny thing is they shoot it on film, so you can't actually shoot for that long. So they had reels of film hidden throughout the set. So as they were following them around, they'd have to quickly change and switch to another camera. And I think they clearly didn't present it as one unbroken take. And they did mix from different takes. But I think they said a large majority of the shots came from that 27-minute uninterrupted take they did.
I love that because I think it obviously wasn't, we don't see it as one take, but it did feel very cohesive and immersive. And I think that's maybe a result of the way they filmed it. And I think it's really cool for the actors too, right? And that they get to be so immersed in that situation for like 30 minutes.
Right, because you get to a sort of climax of emotions. And then it's like, if you're just going to jump right back into the scene and say, okay, this is the part where you've been growing and how upset you are for the last 10 minutes. And now you're at the part where you start crying. Okay, go. Instead, you get to actually go through the entire range of emotions, the highs, the lows, and the buildup and everything.
And there's sort of, it's also hard, right? When you're filming, right? There are like particular shots, like, okay, this is the close up on this person, it's the close up on that person. But there's something so chaotic to this scene, right? Where there's a group of people on the plane, but then there's also this group of people at the wedding, right? Who are all dealing with this death at once, right? Like, yeah, filming it more like a play, you get to have that chaos of all of them there rather than these like individual close up shots and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So that was an incredible hour of television. We can jump around to a bunch of. We haven't talked much about Shiv and Tom.
Yeah.
This is another great example of just sticking with the vulnerability of these characters, where they have this 5-minute argument on the balcony at the tailgate party, And again, I feel like normally you wouldn't get to sit in a conversation that long. But it was such a great climax to all these things that have been bubbling under the surface. They never want to talk about this stuff. Earlier in the season, Tom said to her, like, we were supposed to have a big talk, and she sort of just doesn't want to do it. She said, what's the point of drudging all this stuff up? So that was really satisfying to see and very uncomfortable to see. And it's an argument on TV is at its best when both sides are essentially correct. They're both accusing each other of different things, and neither of them are wrong. And this show does a great job of kind of mixing motivations. So Tom keeps defending himself, saying, I'm with you because I love you. And I think we see at times that he does genuinely love Shiv. But it is also true that he was significantly motivated by her last name, her money, and the fact that she would be a ladder for his career. But I think both are true. In the same way that in the election episode, when Shiv is pulling for Jimenez and is saying, we can't make this call for Mencken, she presents herself as being on the side of the people and on the side of democracy. But it also happens to align with personally what she wants.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of very real, complicated mixing of motivations. And I think that was really on display in this fight between the two of them, because they can make accusations that are entirely accurate. You can be angry at both of them and be on the same side as both of them.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think with both of them, we're seeing this issue where, like, all these characters are so flawed that they don't have, like, all the values these characters have are, like, completely antisocial, right? In that, like, for every character to get what they want, it just involves hurting other people, right? Like, basically, Roman wants to be on the throne, Kendall wants to be on the throne, Shiv wants to be on the throne, Tom wants to be on the throne,
right,
or he wants to suck up to whoever's on the throne, right? Like, none of these.
And Greg, if the throne happens to present itself to him.
Greg is kind of like the three-eyed raven guy in
Bran.
Game of Thrones. Bran, he's just gonna like end up there.
You're not the first one to make that comparison.
And so basically, right, like, these characters, like, all their desires are so toxic and sort of shallow that it prevents them from having meaningful, healthy relationships with other people. And so, like, Tom and Shiv, like, they both, they have these things they're aiming after, which it doesn't allow them to be compatible with each other. And yet they've formed an emotional attachment to each other because they've been together for several years, right? And that's just, like, that's going to happen, right? So they have this, like, really strong emotional attachment, but there's just no way for them to coexist, like, peacefully with each other. Like, it's just not, it's completely flawed and impossible. And so they just keep hurting each other.
Yeah, I had the same thought. Everyone's relationships in this show generally are transactional. And one thing this show does really well is they actually get you to believe that maybe being a billionaire wouldn't be such a great thing, because anybody who talks to you has an ulterior motive. So nobody on this show has the emotional tools necessary to deal with an actual, real emotional bond. So when Shiv and Tom suddenly find that they have one, along with this transactional relationship they have, I don't think either of them knows how to deal with it, which means they're both going to get hurt, because you're going to do things that are contradictory to what you would do if you genuinely loved someone and wanted to be faithful to them. So yeah, that was a very emotional scene. Really well done.
And I loved, actually, I mean, there were a lot of good lines in that argument, but one that stuck out for me was Tom is, like, yelling at Shiv that, like, all Shiv has ever wanted was her father's approval, that he has given her tons of approval and it's done nothing for her because she's broken, right? Like, that she's just endlessly seeking approval from some, person who's never going to give it to her, right? And, like, I think it's a really good description of basically all these characters.
Yeah, I was just
like,
gonna say
all
that.
these characters are so broken. They, especially the kids of Logan, that, like, they just all have this unceasing need for approval from their dad that's never going to be filled up. And so no matter what they do, they're just always going to be empty and broken. And yet, what's really interesting, and somebody sent a message about this, Connor and Willow weirdly have the most healthy relationship. They kind of do, where, like, Connor sort of, he makes this point that he's accepted there's no love in their family.
Yeah.
Right. And Connor is really a messed up character too, but he does seem to have some amount of, like, peace within himself. And I think it's almost like he's accepted the transactional relationship with Willa in a way where they've both they've reached a transactional relationship that somehow does work in that they both do emotionally satisfy their needs for each other.
I think a lot of it's the honesty of it.
Yeah.
Where she tells him safety is a lot of why I'm with you, the safety of power and wealth. But she said, but I'm happy. So both can be a little bit true. Versus Tom and Shiv, it took them a long time to finally talk this out.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's the honesty that they're both they're clear in their emotional needs, and so they're actually able to achieve it. Whereas Tom and Shiv are just constantly lying to themselves and each other.
Yeah, exactly. Greg, we've mentioned him a few times. DD, who has a better story than Greg? What Game of Thrones reference?
So I love Tom telling Greg that information. It's like, I think he said it's like wine. You keep it bottled up until the right moment.
Smash it over someone's
Yeah,
head.
yeah. And that's exactly what he does in the last episode.
What did he do in the last episode?
So
It's Shiv, right?
Shiv tells Kendall, yeah, I called Jimenez's guys. I got the feeling that they're on board.
Let's talk about that for a
Crazy.
second. The worst lie in the world. She says, don't worry, I called them. And then I loved the reveal where Kendall goes to do a follow-up call. So he's going to find out she didn't actually call.
Yeah.
And the way they shot it, where you're just seeing Shiv's face, you don't even hear Kendall's conversation, but he makes the call, and then when he hangs up, you see the look on his face and him walking back. That's just a great example.
And Greg catches him, or Kendall catches Greg. So that's what else you see after the phone call is Greg explains to Kendall that Shiv's been siding with Madsen.
Right, exactly. But that would be like another one of those I'm about to walk on stage for the Living Plus kind of moment. These really that was my reaction in the first season where I wasn't sure if I was into the show or not. But once I saw they can put you in the shoes of the character. You connect with them enough that you feel a little bit of what they feel. And then they turn the stakes up so high, personally for the characters, because they want these things. And we understand that. And you get in these really intense scenarios, and you're going to reach some kind of resolution. And you're going to see every step of it. Like when Logan dies, you're going to see the 30 minutes of panic and grief that comes right after. So that moment of Kendall doing the follow-up call was a moment of that. But yeah, go ahead. You're talking about Greg.
No, I mean,
yeah,
Greg divulges that information. Greg, in a lot of ways, swung that election, right? Because he shared the information with Kendall at the right time that pushed Kendall over the edge.
Yeah, to basically say Shiv is working with Madsen and is essentially stabbing you in the back.
Yeah, and so then he decides, all right, screw my uncertainty. I'm siding with Mencken and with Roman.
Yeah. Any other highlights of the season or any other thoughts you have about Succession that we haven't already covered?
No, I mean, I think these last few episodes especially have been awesome.
Yeah. And one thing I want to add that I forgot to mention earlier is we talked a lot about how these characters don't really change, and that's part of the point of the show and also part of why it just doesn't stick in my head as much when I walk away from it between episodes. But because we are approaching the end, that does add some stakes to say that things might change. There might be some genuine consequences for these characters. Like if they're fighting, the vibe I'm getting is that we're going to go towards some kind of tragedy. I think Logan is a small preview of where this lifestyle leads, right? Dying alone, essentially. So one scenario is that Rome and Kendall win. They get to keep Waystar and ATN, but they realize they've basically held on to a dying medium in a dying empire. And I just hope it doesn't end on that note, though, of like they got screwed over and it's over. I do hope we get to see some of the consequences. And that's why I liked Logan dying so early in the season rather than ending with that. You get to see what happens next. I guess this is a long way of saying I hope we see some kind of change or some kind of reckoning for these characters of really seeing here's how I'm flawed and here's why that's bad and how I'm paying for it.
Yeah. I'm kind of skeptical. I don't know. We have 2 episodes. Let's see if.
Yeah, it is only 2 episodes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Shiv is the closest to that so far, in that she's now kind of lost her brothers because she betrayed them. She's kind of on the losing side now, it seems, and she's pregnant with Tom's child, and Tom doesn't even believe her. Right when she tells him, Tom's like, "Is this another tactic?"
Yeah.
So she's very alone and vulnerable now.
And I do also think, I believe that Shiv, although she often has mixed motivations, I do think she has some values that she feels were pretty horribly violated with Mankins, with them calling it for Mankin. So that would be an example of seeing the consequences of her family and to some extent her choices.
Yeah, I mean, she threatened to go public about everything that happened in that room.
Yeah. And that would obviously tear them apart. And it does feel like we're sort of at the climax of these characters' relationship. Like, as brothers and sisters, at least Shiv versus Kendall and Roman, it feels like that is irreparably broken. And in terms of real relationships for these characters that aren't transactional, even though sometimes it is transactional, but the sibling bond is probably the realest thing they have. And if that's breaking and ultimately does break, that would be sort of a real consequence for the first time in their lives.
Yeah.
Omar says not much time left, but final episode is 90 minutes long.
Cool.